It was in the winter of the year 1247 when I first laid eyes upon the forbidden parchment. The wind howled outside the monastery walls, rattling the wooden shutters like a restless spirit. I, Brother Thomas of Canterbury, had been tasked with the copying of sacred texts, a duty I carried with the devotion expected of a servant of God. But on that night, fate placed before me something no man was meant to see. The manuscript was hidden deep in the archives, behind volumes of the Gospels and the writings of St. Augustine. It was not bound in the fine leather of our holy books, but in old, cracked parchment that smelled of damp earth and centuries of secrecy. The ink had faded, yet the words remained legible. "The Gospel of the Anointed King," it read. My hands trembled as I turned the first page. It told of a revelation given not to the apostles nor to the prophets of old, but to a king, a ruler of this land, whom God had chosen to be a shepherd over both his people and his divine word. This gospel spoke not of Rome or Jerusalem, but of a kingdom beyond the seas, where a ruler was granted visions from the Almighty himself. It named no king, yet in its descriptions of the royal court, the great battles fought for faith, and the divine laws written upon stone, I could not help but think of Alfred, first among Christian kings of England. I should have closed the book then. I should have returned it to its hiding place and never spoken of it again. But the words gripped my soul like the grasp of a drowning man. The gospel proclaimed that the laws of the church had been altered, that the bishops had silenced this divine truth to keep their power unchallenged. It declared that the true commandments had been given not to Rome, but to Albion itself, and that England was meant to stand apart as God's holy kingdom. I scarcely noticed the passing of time until the monastery bell tolled for matins. Only then did I tear my gaze from the forbidden text, my heart pounding. Had this gospel truly been written by the hand of a king? Had our fathers in faith concealed it? Or was it the work of a heretic seeking to lead men astray? Sleep did not find me that night, nor did peace. I resolved to speak to the abbot at dawn, to seek his wisdom on this matter. But before I could act, I found my cell door ajar, the cold air seeping in. My heart clenched as I stepped inside and saw it. The manuscript was gone. The next day, the abbot summoned me. His gaze was heavy with knowledge unspoken. "Brother Thomas," he said gravely, "there are things buried in the past that must remain so. You are a good servant of God. Let your mind not stray to matters beyond his will." I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "The gospel you found does not belong to this world." For days, I obeyed the abbot's warning. I went about my duties in silence, reciting prayers, copying the scriptures, and tending to the sick, as was my calling. But the questions burned within me like a candle held too close to the wick. Who had taken the manuscript, and why? I watched the brothers carefully. Some walked with the ease of those content in their faith, but others held a shadow in their eyes. Brother Matthew, the librarian, flinched when I asked if any old manuscripts had been removed from the archives. Brother Elias, the abbot's scribe, avoided my gaze altogether. Then, on the third night, a piece of parchment was slipped beneath my door. I held my breath as I unfolded it. The ink was hurried, the writing uneven. "The gospel is not lost. Meet me at the crypt beneath the chapel after Compline. Come alone." I hesitated. To disobey the abbot's warning was to risk exile, or worse. And yet, had God himself not placed this mystery in my path? If this gospel was true, then England's destiny had been hidden for centuries. Could I ignore such a calling? That night, after the last prayers had been sung and the monks had returned to their cells, I slipped into the dark corridors of the monastery, my heart pounding with every step. The crypt beneath the chapel was a place few dared enter. It was where the oldest abbots had been laid to rest, their tombs lined along the damp stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of wax and dust. A single candle flickered in the farthest corner, and beside it stood Brother Matthew. "You found it," I whispered. He nodded, his face pale. From within his robes he withdrew the manuscript. "They meant to destroy it, Brother Thomas, but I could not let them." I reached for it, but he held it back. "There is more you must know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "This gospel was written by King Ethelstan himself, nearly 300 years ago." I stiffened. "Ethelstan, the first true king of England?" "Yes," Matthew said. "It was his testimony, his visions, his divine right as given by God. It says that England was chosen as the new Holy Land, that our people were to hold the sacred law, not Rome, and that is why the Church buried it. To acknowledge this gospel would be to admit that Rome's authority was never meant to reach these shores." The weight of his words crushed me. If this was true, then all we had been taught about the Church, about the power of Rome, about England's place in God's plan, was a lie. A noise echoed from the stairway above. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. "They know," Matthew hissed. "You must take it." He thrust the manuscript into my hands just as the crypt door burst open. A group of monks entered, their faces grim. At their head stood the abbot himself. "Brother Thomas," he said, his voice sorrowful, "you were warned." Behind him, 2 monks seized Matthew, dragging him toward the exit. "No!" I cried, stepping forward, but firm hands grasped my arms, holding me in place. The abbot sighed. "This gospel is a danger, not to God's truth, but to the order he has established." He stepped closer, looking into my eyes. "Do you wish to challenge the Church, Brother Thomas? Do you wish to bring chaos upon England?"